Melissa Bryan decided to risk everything. The twin moons hadn't quite set over the kingdom of Ashenvale. She stood in the shadow of the Grand Colosseum's outer walls, clutching registration papers that had cost her 3 months' wages, money her village could barely afford to lose. At her feet, Ember sat perfectly still, his amber eyes reflecting the torchlight from the registration pavilion ahead. She could already hear the laughter. It wasn't the first time people had laughed at her. Growing up as a commoner in Emberwood Village, watching nobles pass through on their hunting expeditions with their massive war hounds and armored bears, she'd grown accustomed to being invisible. But invisibility was better than this. This pointed, cruel mockery that had started the moment she'd joined the registration line. "Look at that," someone whispered behind her, not bothering to lower their voice. Someone let their daughter bring the family pet. Melissa didn't turn around. She'd learned long ago that reaction only fed the beast. Instead, she ran her thumb over the registration seal, feeling the raised wax imprint of the royal crest. The Alpha King's Grand Tournament, held once every decade. 20 beast tamers competing for the title of Royal Beast Master, and more importantly, unrestricted access to the Moonvale Library's forbidden archives. The library, that's what mattered. Not the title, not the glory, not the chance to prove anything to anyone. Just the library. Because somewhere in those ancient texts was the answer to why her village's crops were dying, why their wells were running dry, why children who should have been healthy were wasting away despite the healer's best efforts. 5 years of slow decline, and no one could explain it. No one except maybe the forgotten knowledge locked away in the kingdom's most restricted chamber. "They will learn, little one." Ember's voice whispered in her mind, soft as morning mist. "But the learning will be painful for them." Melissa's hand found the soft fur between his ears, drawing comfort from the warmth there. "Let's just get through registration first." The line shuffled forward. Ahead, she could see the registration officials processing contestants, each arrival more spectacular than the last. Lord someone or other arrived in a carriage pulled by 6 white horses, his massive dire wolf snarling from inside a reinforced cage that required 4 servants to wheel into position. A duchess descended from a floating platform, her griffin's wings creating wind that sent papers flying and forced officials to grab their hats. Then there was Melissa, worn leather boots, a simple traveling pack, hair pulled back in a practical braid, and a fox that weighed maybe 30 pounds soaking wet. Now, I should tell you something the crowd didn't know then, something that was already being whispered in taverns and market squares by those who paid attention to old stories. They said that when the kingdom started dying 300 years ago, it wasn't weather or bad luck or natural cycles. They said it was because something sacred had been broken, some ancient promise betrayed. Most dismissed it as superstition, the kind of tales old wives told to scare children into behaving. But a few, a very few, wondered if maybe, just maybe, those old stories held more truth than anyone wanted to admit. And if you were one of those few, you might want to hear what happened next. Because what you're about to witness isn't just about a girl and her fox. It's about whether some mistakes are too old to fix, or whether truth can heal even centuries-old wounds. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, Melissa had to survive registration. Next! The registration official's voice cut through her thoughts. He was a portly man with a permanent sneer, the kind who'd clearly spent too many years looking down at people from behind his desk. His eyes swept over Melissa with obvious disdain before dropping to Ember. Name and beast classification. Melissa Bryan of Emberwood Village. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Companion classification, spirit fox. The official's quill stopped mid-scratch. He looked up slowly, then down at Ember, then back at Melissa. Then he laughed. It wasn't a chuckle or a polite cough of amusement. It was a full, belly-deep laugh that drew the attention of every person within earshot. "Spirit fox?" He could barely get the words out between guffaws. "That's a common red fox, girl. Did you steal someone's pet? This is the Alpha Kings tournament, not a village fair where children show their rabbits." Heat crept up Melissa's neck, but she kept her voice level. "The classification is Spirit Fox. May I complete my registration?" "Is this a jest?" A booming voice came from behind her. Melissa turned to see Lord Cassian Vale, tall and broad-shouldered in polished armor, his massive dire wolf Ragnar straining against chains held by 3 servants. The wolf was easily 6 feet tall at the shoulder, scarred from what must have been 100 battles. Lord Cassian's laugh was even crueler than the officials. "Someone call the child's mother. She's wandered away from home." The laughter spread like fire through dry grass. Other contestants pressed closer, eager for entertainment while they waited their turn. "How adorable!" Lady Seraphina Cross glided forward, her enchanted panther Azura trailing behind her. The beast's fur literally flickered with blue flames that cast dancing shadows on the cobblestones. Seraphina was beautiful in the way that weapons are beautiful, polished, sharp, and designed to cut. Does it do tricks? Can it fetch? Roll over on command? The peasant girl thinks her house pet is tournament-worthy. Baron Thaddeus Crane's warbear Goliath chose that moment to roar, a sound that shook the ground and sent several people stumbling backward. The Baron grinned at the effect. My Goliath could swallow that thing in one bite and not notice. Melissa stood perfectly still, one hand resting lightly on Ember's head. The small fox hadn't moved, hadn't shown any sign of fear despite being surrounded by predators that outweighed him 50 times over. He simply sat there, amber eyes calm, almost amused. Then Lady Seraphina made her mistake. She stepped too close, her enchanted panther following. Azura's blue flames flared brighter as she approached, the beast's lips pulling back to show fangs the length of daggers. For just a heartbeat, Ember's eyes flashed gold. Not amber. Gold, like molten sunlight. Azura stopped mid-step. The massive panther, who moments ago had been radiating predatory confidence, suddenly backed up 3 paces, her flames guttering low. A soft whine escaped her throat, not of aggression, but of confusion, almost submission. "Azura?" Lady Seraphina's perfect composure cracked slightly. "What's wrong with you?" But the moment passed so quickly it might have been imagination. Ember's eyes returned to normal amber, and Azura shook her head as if clearing it, flames resuming their usual intensity. Yet the panther didn't approach again. The registration official, still chuckling, processed Melissa's papers with exaggerated slowness. "Well, the King's decree states that anyone who pays the registration fee and passes basic screening can enter." He stamped her papers with more force than necessary. "So I suppose we'll allow this entertainment. The crowd will enjoy watching you forfeit in the first challenge. Number 17, next." Melissa took her papers and walked toward the competitor's entrance tunnel, Ember trotting beside her. Behind her, the laughter continued, mixed with pitying whispers and cruel speculation about how quickly she'd be eliminated. "Ignore them," Ember's voice whispered in her mind. "They see only what they expect to see, a small fox, a common girl. They cannot imagine that the greatest power often wears the humblest face." "I know," Melissa thought back. "I'm not here for them. I'm here for the village, for the answer. And you shall have it, little one. But first they must learn what they've forgotten." The tunnel was cool and dark after the bright morning sun. Melissa's footsteps echoed off stone walls as she made her way toward the arena. With each step, she thought about the dying crops back home, the children with hollowed cheeks, the wells that used to run clear, now producing only muddy trickles, the desperate hope in the village elder's eyes when she'd volunteered to enter the tournament. "It's a fool's errand," they'd said. "You're not noble born, you have no great beast, you'll be humiliated." "Perhaps," she'd replied, "but someone has to try." The tunnel opened up, and suddenly Melissa stood at the entrance to the arena proper. 10,000 spectators packed the circular coliseum, their excited chatter creating a wall of sound that hit her like a physical force. The morning sun blazed down on blood-stained sand that had soaked up the sweat and tears of countless warriors over 3 centuries. High above, on an obsidian throne that seemed to drink in the light, sat Alpha King Davian Thornbrook. He was 35, she'd heard, crowned barely 6 months ago after his father's sudden death. Silver streaked his dark beard, and his eyes were the gray of storm clouds over mountains. Beside his throne prowled Tempest, his shadow wolf, a beast the size of a small horse, with midnight black fur shot through with veins of silver that flickered like captured lightning. A shrewd-looking woman with silver hair stood near the throne, Chancellor Petra Blackwood, the king's advisor. Her sharp eyes missed nothing. A herald in crimson and gold stepped forward, his voice amplified by ancient acoustic magic built into the arena's structure. By decree of Alpha King Davian Thornbrook, the grand tournament begins. 20 beast tamers from across the 7 kingdoms shall compete in 3 trials: strength, bond, and combat. The victor shall claim the title of Royal Beastmaster and unrestricted access to the Moonvale Library's forbidden archives. The crowd roared its approval, a sound like thunder that rolled around the stone walls. Let the worthy prove themselves. The herald's voice dropped to an ominous rumble. And let the pretenders be exposed. Contestants, enter! One by one, the beast tamers emerged from the tunnel, each introduction bringing thunderous applause. Lord Cassian Vale and his dire wolf Ragnar, 6 feet at the shoulder, scarred and vicious, a veteran of countless battles. Lady Seraphina Cross and her enchanted panther Azura, whose blue flames had never been extinguished in 7 years of bonding. Baron Thaddeus Crane and his war bear Goliath, whose roar could shatter glass and whose paws could crush stone. Duchess Vivian Ashford and her juvenile griffin, Silverclaw, whose razor-sharp talons gleamed in the sunlight. 12 more followed, each with beasts more impressive than the last, massive creatures of fang and claw, of feather and scale, of flame and shadow. The crowd cheered itself hoarse with each appearance. Then came number 17, Melissa Bryan of Emberwood Village, the herald announced. Melissa walked into the blazing sunlight, Ember trotting calmly beside her. For a moment, the crowd simply stared in confused silence. Then someone shouted, "What is that?" "Someone's pet escaped," another voice cried. "This is an insult to the tournament." The laughter started. 10,000 people finding hilarity in the small woman and her smaller fox. Children pointed and giggled. Nobles shook their heads in disbelief. Even common folk in the highest seats, who might have been expected to root for one of their own, seemed embarrassed on her behalf. Alpha King Davian leaned forward slightly on his throne, one eyebrow raised. Chancellor Petra leaned close, whispering urgently. Melissa couldn't hear the words, but she could see the advisor's disapproval, the king's thoughtful frown. "Sire, we should disqualify her." Petra's voice drifted down, just loud enough to hear. "This diminishes the tournament's prestige. That creature couldn't fight a barn cat, let alone compete here." But Alpha King Davian studied Melissa with those storm-gray eyes. He noticed, perhaps, that she stood without shame or apology. He noticed that the small fox sat with unusual stillness, with eyes that seemed too intelligent, too aware for a common animal. He noticed the way Melissa's hand rested gently on the fox's head, not controlling, but simply connected. "Let her compete," Davian said finally, his voice carrying natural authority that silenced the nearby nobles. "If she fails, she fails, but something tells me there's more here than meets the eye." Chancellor Petra's disapproval was obvious, but she bowed. "As you wish, Your Majesty." The herald's voice boomed again. "The first challenge, the trial of strength, each." Beasts shall demonstrate their power by breaking through an ironwood barrier. 20 feet wide, 5 feet thick, reinforced with steel and enchanted for durability. Show us your might. Massive wooden walls rose from the arena floor, each one identical, positioned in front of each contestant. The crowd's excitement built to a fever pitch. Lord Cassian Vale! Ragnar the dire wolf charged his barrier with a roar that echoed off stone walls. His first strike cracked the wood. His second splintered it further. His third shattered it completely, sending splinters flying across the sand. The crowd went wild. Baron Thaddeus Crane. Goliath the warbear rose on his hind legs, 12 feet of muscle and fury, and brought both massive paws down in a single devastating blow. The entire barrier collapsed, and the ground shook hard enough that people in the front rows grabbed their seats for balance. Lady Seraphina, cross! Azura's blue flames intensified to white-hot intensity. The panther simply walked toward her barrier, and the enchanted wood burst into flames that consumed it in seconds, leaving nothing but ash. Each demonstration was more impressive than the last. Griffins tore through barriers with talons like swords. War lizards shattered them with spiked tails. Shadow wolves dissolved them with darkness itself. Finally, Melissa Bryan of Emberwood Village. The laughter was already starting. Nobles were placing bets. 10 seconds before she forfeits. 20 gold coins says the fox runs away scared. This will be the shortest attempt in tournament history. Melissa walked to her barrier with Ember trotting beside her. The wall loomed before them, massive and impenetrable. The crowd leaned forward, eager for the humiliation, for the moment when reality would crush this peasant girl's foolish dreams. Melissa didn't command Ember to attack. She didn't shout or gesture or try to force him to prove himself. Instead, she simply knelt beside him in the sand. She placed her hand gently on his head. She closed her eyes. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The crowd's laughter built, anticipation turning to mockery. Then Ember's eyes began to glow. Not amber anymore, gold. Pure molten gold, like staring directly into the heart of the sun. The small fox stood. He walked calmly to the base of the ironwood barrier, 20 feet wide, 5 feet thick, reinforced and enchanted to withstand the assault of the kingdom's most powerful beasts. He touched his nose to it, and the entire wall turned to ash. Not broken, not splintered, not even burned. The ironwood barrier, 20 feet of steel-reinforced, magically fortified wood that had withstood the assault of dire wolves and warbears, simply ceased to exist. It crumbled to fine gray powder, so light it drifted away on the morning breeze like dandelion seeds. Where solid wood had stood moments before, there was now only empty air and a light dusting of ash settling on the sand. Ember's eyes faded, from molten gold back to their usual amber. He trotted calmly back to Melissa's side and sat down, tail curling neatly around his paws, as if he'd done nothing more remarkable than fetch a stick. The arena had fallen into absolute silence. 10,000 people sat frozen, mouths open, unable to process what they'd just witnessed. Even the wind seemed to have stopped, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then the murmuring began. What just happened? Did anyone else see? That's impossible. That's not possible. How did a fox... Baron Thaddeus Crane was the first to break the spell. He lurched to his feet, his face purple with rage and something that might have been fear. Cheating! His voice cracked across the arena. Dark magic, sorcery. No common beast could... There's no way. She's using forbidden arts. Several nobles joined the outcry, their voices overlapping in confused anger. Disqualify her. This is corruption of the sacred tournament. She's made a pact with dark forces. But their protests died as Ember turned those bright amber eyes toward Baron Thaddeus. The fox didn't growl, didn't bare his teeth, didn't make a single threatening gesture. He simply looked at the Baron, And for one eternal second, everyone in the arena felt it. A presence. Vast and ancient, like standing at the edge of an ocean and suddenly understanding how deep the water went, how small you were in comparison. It pressed down on them, not painful but undeniable, primal. The kind of power that made every wolf in the Colosseum whimper and flatten their ears, that made grown warriors grip their seats, that made the hair on the back of every neck stand straight up. Then it was gone. So quickly it might have been imagination. Ember returned his attention to Melissa, and the pressure vanished as if it had never existed. The small fox looked utterly ordinary again. Just a common red fox sitting patiently beside his human companion. But no one was laughing now. High, on his throne, Alpha King Davian sat forward sharply, his storm-gray eyes intense and focused. What was that? His voice was low, meant only for Chancellor Petra, but in the shocked silence it carried. Petra's knuckles were white where she gripped the throne's armrest. "I don't know, sire." Her voice shook slightly, the first time Melissa had heard the composed advisor sound anything less than certain. That power, it shouldn't exist, not anymore. Find out everything about her. Davian's command was quiet but absolute. Family line, village history, how she came by that creature, everything, immediately. Petra nodded and hurried away, her robes snapping behind her. The herald, looking shaken, cleared his throat and tried to restore order. The first challenge is complete. We will, proceed to the second challenge after a brief recess. But the damage was done. As Melissa walked back to the competitors' area, she could feel every eye on her. Not mocking now, not laughing. Something else. Fear, maybe. Suspicion. Wonder. The nobles clustered together, whispering urgently behind their hands. The common folk stared with expressions ranging from awe to terror. That wasn't subtle, Melissa thought to Ember. They forced my hand, Ember replied calmly. Baron Thaddeus accused you of dark magic. I merely reminded him what real power feels like. Consider it educational. The second challenge began an hour later, after much consultation between officials and heated arguments among the nobles. Several had tried to have Melissa disqualified on grounds of unnatural advantage or corruption of sacred competition. But Alpha King Davian had shut down each protest with increasing impatience. The rules state that any bond between tamer and beast is permitted, he'd said, his voice carrying across the arena. I see no dark magic, no forbidden arts, unless someone can provide actual evidence of rule-breaking, rather than merely being upset they were outperformed. No one had evidence. They had only fear and wounded pride. The trial of bond was explained by the herald with great ceremony. Tamer and beast will be separated by magical barriers. Each pair must navigate a maze and reunite at its center. Success requires true understanding, perfect synchronization. Commands alone will not suffice. Let us see who shares genuine connection and who merely forces obedience. The maze materialized in the center of the arena, walls of shimmering blue energy that blocked both sight and sound. Once separated, tamers and beasts would have no way to communicate. They would have to trust their bond, their understanding of each other's minds. Lord Cassian went first, his confidence clearly shaken but his pride intact. He entered one side of the maze while Ragnar entered the other. For 5 minutes, the crowd watched their progress through magical viewing spheres floating above the arena. It was a disaster without Lord Cassian's alpha commands. Directing every movement, Ragnar became confused, then agitated, then violent. The dire wolf attacked the maze walls, snarling and snapping at the magical barriers. When he finally stumbled into the center, Lord Cassian was already there, red-faced and furious at the time wasted. 14 others failed completely. Their beasts panicked without constant commands, unable to make decisions independently. They attacked walls, ran in circles, or simply froze in place waiting for orders that never came. One by one, officials called forfeitures until only 4 competitors remained: Lady Seraphina, Duchess Vivienne, Baron Thaddeus, and Melissa. Lady Seraphina and Azura managed to complete the challenge, but barely. Baron Thaddeus fared even worse. Goliath, bred for raw destruction, had never been asked to think independently. Without constant commands, the massive warbear simply stood frozen at the maze entrance, refusing to move, until officials were forced to declare a forfeit. See, Baron's face turned purple with humiliation as he stormed from the arena, his legendary beast trailing behind him like a confused child. The enchanted panther burned through several walls rather than navigating properly, taking twice the expected time. When they reunited, Azura's flames were flickering uncertainly, and Lady Seraphina looked pale. Then came Melissa's turn. She walked to one entrance of the maze, Ember to the other. The magical barriers rose between them, cutting off all sight and sound. Through the viewing spheres, the crowd watched both of them simultaneously. Melissa stood still for a moment, eyes closed. Then she began walking, left turn, 3 rights straight. Wait at the intersection. Simultaneously, on the other side of the maze, Ember moved. Left turn, 3 rights, straight. Wait at the intersection. Their paths were perfectly synchronized, not close, not approximate, exactly identical, as if they were moving as one being split into 2 bodies. They reached the center at exactly the same moment, their timing so precise they walked through the final barriers within a heartbeat of each other. Total time, 2 minutes and 37 seconds, the fastest completion by nearly 3 full minutes. The crowd erupted, not in cheers but in confused, almost frightened murmuring. How did she... That's not possible without speaking. No one is that synchronized. Chancellor Petra had returned to the king's side, scrolls in hand. Now she stood and pointed at Melissa, her voice sharp with accusation. Impossible! You must have practiced this course beforehand. There's no other explanation. Or you're using forbidden telepathic arts. Mental manipulation of beasts is strictly prohibited. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Melissa stood calmly in the center of the maze, one hand resting on Ember's head. We didn't need to practice. Ember and I don't work through commands. We work through understanding. Prove it, Baron Thaddeus shouted. Show us this understanding without your tricks. Very well. Melissa's voice was quiet but carried in the hushed arena. She closed her eyes and didn't speak, didn't gesture, didn't move. Ember's entire posture changed. His ears pricked forward, his body tensed, every muscle coiled and ready. His eyes swept the arena as if searching for threats. Then Melissa's expression softened. Immediately, Ember relaxed. He sat, tail wagging gently, completely at ease. I thought of danger, Melissa explained simply. Then I thought of peace. Ember and I are connected, not through magic or commands or tricks, through trust. That's forbidden magic. Baron Thaddeus was on his feet again, face red. Beasts don't read minds. She's corrupting the tournament with dark arts. This is a mockery of everything. Enough! Alpha King Davian's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. He stood, and the entire arena fell silent. His storm-gray eyes were fixed on Melissa, unreadable. I have seen many tamers in my life. I have watched countless demonstrations of the bond between human and beast. What I see before me is not dark magic. He paused, and something shifted in his expression. Something almost like sadness, or perhaps regret. What I see is something we have perhaps forgotten, what a true bond looks like, when 2 beings understand each other so completely that words become unnecessary, when trust runs so deep that thought becomes action. He turned to address the entire arena. Melissa Bryan advances to the final challenge. Anyone who wishes to dispute this can take their grievance to me personally. No one spoke, but the looks directed at Melissa were no longer mocking. They were calculating, hostile, dangerous. The mandatory feast that evening was held in the grand hall beneath the arena. Long tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fresh breads, fruits, and wines from every corner of the kingdom. It should have been a celebration, competitors sharing stories, nobles mingling, excitement building for the final challenge tomorrow. Instead, it felt like walking into a den of wolves. Melissa sat alone at the lower tables reserved for common-born competitors. Other contestants gave her a wide berth, clustering at the far ends of tables or finding excuses to sit elsewhere entirely. Servants who brought food set plates down quickly and hurried away, making warning signs against evil when they thought she wasn't looking. She could hear the whispers, not even trying to be quiet anymore. Witch. Unnatural. That fox is cursed. She's corrupted, mark my words. Ember rested at her feet, appearing to sleep, but his presence did nothing to calm the fears around them. If anything, it intensified them. They fear what they do not understand. Ember's voice whispered in her mind. This will grow worse before it grows better. I know. Melissa pushed food around her plate. Appetite gone. I just need to survive one more day, win the tournament, access the library, find the answers I need. Then we can go home. Perhaps. Or perhaps you'll find more than answers waiting in those ancient texts. At the high table, the nobles were gathered in a tight cluster. Melissa couldn't hear their exact words, but their body language told the story. Intense whispers, angry gestures, heads bent together in conspiracy. Lord Cassian's face was still red from his humiliation in the maze. We cannot let this peasant girl embarrass us further. The people are starting to look at her with admiration, as if she's something special rather than an aberration. Lady Seraphina leaned in, her beauty turned cold and sharp. The commoners in the stands were cheering for her after the second challenge, cheering for one of their own to defeat their betters. This sets a dangerous precedent. Agreed. Baron Thaddeus drained his wine cup and signaled for more. I know tournament officials, men who can be persuaded, shall we say, for the right price. Evidence can be discovered. Illegal enhancement crystals, perhaps. Banned substances. Dark artifacts. Lord Cassian's eyes lit up. Plant them in her quarters tonight. Tomorrow morning, before the final challenge, have them discovered by guards. A public accusation, proof of cheating, immediate disqualification. The king seemed protective of her today, Lady Seraphina warned. He shut down our protests rather decisively. He won't have a choice if there's physical evidence, Baron Thaddeus countered. Tournament law is clear. Any competitor found with illegal enhancements is immediately disqualified and barred from competition for life. Not even the king can override that without looking weak. They raised their cups in a silent toast. Agreement reached. Conspiracy sealed. None of them noticed Ember's ears twitch at their table far across the hall. None of them saw his eyes open briefly, glowing faint gold in the shadows before closing again. Melissa pushed back from her table, her food barely touched. I'm going to my quarters. This is unbearable. Rest well, little one, Ember advised. Tomorrow will be enlightening. As she walked through the corridors to the competitors' chambers, Melissa let herself wonder, just for a moment, if this was worth it. The mockery she could handle, but the hatred, the fear, the sense that everyone wanted her to fail. It wore on her spirit like water on stone. She thought of her village, little Emma, 7 years old, who'd been healthy and bright until last summer, when she started wasting away despite eating well. Old Willem, who'd farmed the same land for 60 years and watched his fields yield less and less each season until this year they'd barely produced enough to survive winter. The well in the village square that her grandmother said used to run so clear you could see straight to the bottom, now producing only muddy water that tasted of rust and sadness. The Moonvale Library held answers. It had to. Ancient knowledge about land bonds, spirit connections, the old ways that had been forgotten. She just had to survive one more challenge. She fell asleep with Ember curled against her side, his warmth the only comfort in a hostile place. Morning came too quickly. Melissa woke to pounding on her door and angry voices. Before she could even sit up, the door burst open. Chancellor Petra strode in, flanked by 4 royal guards, her face a mask of cold satisfaction. "Melissa Bryan, you stand accused of using illegal enhancements in competition." What are you talking about?" Melissa scrambled to her feet, confusion giving way to growing dread. Petra reached into Melissa's travel pack and pulled out a small leather pouch. She opened it to reveal 3 crystals that glowed with sickly green light. Enhancement crystals, banned substances that artificially amplify a beast's power, found hidden in your belongings. "I've never seen those before. I would never." "Lies!" Baron Thaddeus appeared in the doorway, his performance of outrage almost convincing. "We knew something was unnatural about that fox's power." More nobles crowded behind him, voices overlapping. "She's been cheating all along. That explains everything. Fraud! Disqualify her immediately." Within minutes, Melissa found herself dragged into the arena, still in her sleeping clothes, with what felt like the entire kingdom pressing in to witness her disgrace. The stands filled rapidly as word spread. The accusation was being repeated everywhere. Cheater, fraud, dark witch who'd corrupted the sacred tournament. Chancellor Petra stood at the center of the arena, holding the crystals aloft for all to see. These illegal enhancement crystals were found in Melissa Bryan's quarters. Tournament law is clear. Immediate disqualification. She is hereby barred. "I didn't put them there." Melissa's voice was raw with desperation. "Someone is framing me. I would never." But the crowd was already turning. The brief admiration from yesterday had evaporated, replaced by the comfortable certainty that they'd been right all along. She was a fraud, a peasant who'd tried to rise above her station and gotten caught. The nobles were nodding smugly. Even some of the common folk looked betrayed, as if she'd personally disappointed them. Lord Cassian stood with his arms crossed, a small smile playing at his lips. Lady Seraphina whispered something to another noble who laughed. Baron Thaddeus was already calling for guards to escort her from the arena. Melissa felt tears burning behind her eyes, not for herself, but for her village, for the children who would keep dying, for the crops that would keep failing, for the answers that would remain locked away in the forbidden library. Then Ember moved. The small fox, who'd been sitting calmly at her feet throughout the accusation, walked forward. His steps were unhurried, unbothered by the chaos around him. He approached Chancellor Petra, who instinctively took a step back, remembering the pressure she'd felt yesterday. Ember looked up at the crystals in her hand. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached up with one paw and touched them. The sickly green glow flickered. Then the crystals shimmered, their appearance rippling like water disturbed by a stone. The green light faded. The crystal shapes remained, but now something else was visible, something that had been hidden by illusion magic. Engraved on the back of each crystal, clear as day in the bright morning sun, was a family crest, a crest everyone in the kingdom recognized. The Vale family crest, Lord Cassian's crest. The arena erupted in gasps and confused shouting. All eyes turned to Lord Cassian, whose face had gone from smug satisfaction to pale horror in the space of a heartbeat. "Those aren't, I didn't," he stammered, backing away. "Someone else must have—" But there was no explaining away his family crest on illegal crystals, planted in a competitor's belongings. The crowd's anger, so recently directed at Melissa, pivoted with stunning speed. He tried to frame her. Sabotage. The nobles can't win fairly, so they cheat. Alpha King Davian rose slowly from his throne, his face darker than a thunderstorm. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but it cut through the noise like a knife through silk. Lord Cassian Vale, did you plant false evidence to frame a fellow competitor? Lord Cassian's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. His face had gone from pale horror to deep crimson, the color creeping up from his collar to his hairline. Those crystals they're cursed. She's manipulating them with her dark magic. Can't you see? But his protests died as Alpha King Davian descended from his throne. The king moved with deliberate slowness, each step echoing in the arena that had fallen deathly quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Lord Cassian Vale. Davian's voice was cold as winter frost. You stand accused of sabotaging a fellow competitor, of planting false evidence, of attempting to corrupt the sacred tournament through deception and lies. Your Majesty, the evidence is clear. Davian gestured to the crystals still lying in the sand, Lord Cassian's family crest gleaming in the sunlight for all to see. Your own crest condemns you. You are hereby disqualified from this tournament and stripped of your entry rights. Guards, remove him. Royal guards moved forward immediately, their hands firm on Lord Cassian's arms. For a moment, it looked like he might resist, might try to fight his way free. Then his face twisted with rage and something uglier, pure, venomous hatred. "You'll regret this!" he screamed as they dragged him toward the exit. "All of you! That creature is an abomination. That girl is corrupting everything she touches. Mark my words, she'll destroy this kingdom. The arena doors slammed shut, cutting off his shrieks. But the silence that followed was worse than his screaming, because while Lord Cassian had been removed, his words remained, hanging in the air like poison. Melissa stood in the center of the arena, vindicated but not victorious. The evidence had cleared her name, but Lord Cassian's final accusation had found purchase in minds already primed to fear. She could see it in the faces around her, nobles whispering urgently, their expressions closed and hostile. Even some of the common folk who'd cheered for her yesterday now looked uncertain, as if wondering if there might be truth in Lord Cassian's ravings. Lady Seraphina stepped forward, her voice carrying clear and cold across the sand. Lord Cassian's methods were dishonorable, yes, but his concerns were not entirely without merit. She turned to address the crowd, playing to them like an actress on a stage. Even if the girl didn't cheat with crystals, can we ignore what we've seen? That fox is unnatural. Its power defies explanation. Here, Baron Thaddeus added his voice to hers. I propose we investigate her bloodline before allowing her to continue. Only dark practitioners and witches can achieve such bonds. For the safety of the kingdom, the girl has broken no rules. Alpha King Davian's voice cut through their protests like a blade. She has committed no crimes. She will compete in the final challenge as is her right, by law and by achievement. But even as he spoke the words, Melissa could see the calculation in the noble's eyes. She was legally protected. They couldn't disqualify her without cause. But socially, she was more isolated than ever, feared, suspected, marked as something dangerous and other. The final challenge would proceed, but the real battle had shifted. It was no longer just about proving herself worthy. It was about survival. In the king's private chamber, high above the arena, Chancellor Petra laid out scrolls across the obsidian desk, maps, genealogies, ancient records pulled from the deepest archives. Her investigation had been thorough, and what she'd uncovered made her hands shake slightly as she pointed to the relevant passages. Sire, I've researched the girl's background as you commanded. Her finger traced a family line that went back generations. names written in fading ink. Her family line traces back to the original beast speakers. Davian's cup of wine stopped halfway to his lips. Beast speakers? They were exterminated 300 years ago. My ancestor Davian II ensured there were no survivors. The histories are clear on this. The histories are lies. Petra's voice was blunt. Or rather, they're incomplete. Melissa Bryan descends from Helena Greyheart, one of the last beast speakers. She fled the purges, changed her name to Bryan, hid in the borderlands, and married a common farmer. The bloodline survived in obscurity, passing down mother to daughter, carefully hidden for 3 centuries. Davian set down his cup, his expression unreadable. Why are you telling me this? What difference does her ancestry make? Petra hesitated, then gestured to another scroll, this one older, the parchment brittle with age. Because of what's in the Moonveil Library, sire. The real reason it's been kept forbidden all these years. Which is? The truth about the War of Dominion. Petra's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, as if the walls themselves might be listening. It wasn't a war, it was genocide. The beast speakers and their guardian spirit partners discovered the nobles' corruption, embezzlement, illegal deals with enemy kingdoms, planned coups against your ancestor. Rather than face justice, rather than answer for their crimes, the nobles killed them all. Every beast speaker, every guardian spirit they could find. Then they rewrote history to claim the spirits were beasts to be tamed, rather than divine partners who were murdered in their sleep. The color drained from Davian's face. My grandmother told me stories about the first king earning his crown through friendship with a guardian, not conquest, about a betrayal that cursed the kingdom. I thought they were just stories, legends meant to teach moral lessons. They were memories, Petra said quietly, dressed up as fairy tales so they could be passed down without being suppressed. Your grandmother knew the truth. Most of the old bloodlines know, even if they don't speak it aloud. We built our prosperity on the graves of innocence, sire. Davian stood and walked to the window, looking down at the arena where Melissa waited for the final challenge. If that fox truly is what you suspect, one of the original 7 guardians, and if Melissa wins access to the library, she'll learn what was done to her ancestors, Petra finished. She'll learn your bloodline built its throne on genocide, that her people were slaughtered to hide corruption and maintain power. She'll learn that the decline of the kingdom, the failing crops, the dying wells, the weak children, all of it stems from breaking the ancient covenant between humans and spirits. The land itself is dying because of what we did. Yes. Davian was quiet for a long moment, his hands gripping the window frame. My grandmother told me once that the kingdom was cursed, that we'd been dying slowly for 300 years and would continue dying until we made amends for ancient sins. I asked her what sins. She said I'd know when it mattered. He turned back to Petra. This is what she meant. This is what's been killing us. Petra moved closer, her voice urgent. Sire, if the Guardians have truly returned, they could destroy this kingdom, wipe us from the map. Everything we've built, everyone we've sworn to protect, all of it could be ash by sunset. She paused, letting the words sink in. We could arrange for the girl to have an accident, quietly, before she reaches the library, before she learns too much, before that creature decides to judge us for our ancestors' crimes. The silence stretched long and terrible. Davian stared at the scrolls on his desk, at 300 years of lies written in elegant script, at the evidence of genocide dressed up as heroic conquest. He thought of his grandmother's gentle voice telling him stories by candlelight. He thought of his father, who'd never mentioned any of this, who'd ruled with absolute certainty that his power was righteous and earned. He thought of the kingdom slowly failing year by year, generation by generation, dying from a wound it wouldn't acknowledge. No, his voice was firm. We'll see this through honestly. But sire, if my ancestors' sins are coming due, if the bill for 3 centuries of lies is finally being presented, perhaps it's time to pay the debt. He met Petra's shocked gaze steadily. We can't heal what we won't face. We can't fix what we won't admit is broken. Let her compete. Let her win or lose fairly. And if she wins, let her learn the truth. Whatever comes after, we'll face it with honor. Petra bowed, though her expression showed she thought her king was making a terrible mistake. As you command, Your Majesty. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the arena sand as the herald announced the final challenge. The trial of combat, direct combat between beasts, controlled to stop before lethal damage. Only 3 competitors remain. The crowd roared. After the drama of the morning, the accusation, the exposure, the scandal, they were hungry for violence, for spectacle, for blood. This is what they'd come for. This is what the tournament was truly about. First match, Duchess Vivian Ashford versus Melissa Bryan. Duchess Vivian entered the combat circle with Silverclaw, her juvenile griffin. The creature was beautiful, eagle's head with a razor-sharp beak, lion's body rippling with muscle, wings that spanned 20 feet when fully extended. She defeated 2 other opponents already today through sheer aerial superiority. Ground-bound beasts couldn't touch her when she took to the sky. Melissa walked forward with Ember trotting beside her. The size difference was almost comical. Silverclaw stood 6 feet tall at the shoulder. Ember barely reached Melissa's knee. The griffin had talons like curved daggers. Ember had paws that looked soft enough to fit in a child's palm. The starting horn blared. Silverclaw launched into the air with a piercing shriek, wings beating powerful downdrafts that kicked up sand. She circled once, twice, gaining altitude, then dove. Her talons were extended, aimed directly at Ember's small body, moving with the speed and precision of a predator who'd never missed her mark. Ember didn't run, didn't dodge. He simply moved. It was like watching water flow around stone. Silverclaw's talons, which should have closed on flesh and fur, found only empty air. Ember was beside the attack, not ahead of it, as if he'd known exactly where it would land before it happened. The griffin pulled up, confused, and dove again. Again, Ember flowed out of the way, not with obvious effort, not with dramatic leaps or desperate scrambles. He simply wasn't where the attacks landed, moving with an economy of motion that made it look effortless. Silverclaw grew frustrated. Her attacks became more aggressive, more reckless, driven by the confusion of prey that wouldn't act like prey should. She dove lower, faster, talons extended, and beak open to tear. Ember reached up with one paw and gently touched her wing. The effect was immediate and startling. Silverclaw's aggression vanished like smoke. The griffin's eyes, which had been fierce and predatory, suddenly calmed. She landed softly in the sand, folded her wings, and simply sat. Refused to attack. Refused to move. Just sat there looking at Ember with an expression that might have been wonder or might have been peace. Silverclaw. Duchess Vivian approached her griffin, bewildered. What's wrong? Why did you... Stop! Silverclaw! But the griffin wouldn't respond to commands. She just sat there, perfectly content, as if she'd found something she'd been searching for without knowing she was searching. What did you do to her? Vivian's voice cracked slightly. Melissa's answer was simple. Nothing. Ember just asked her politely to stop. Vivian stared at her griffin, then at the small fox, then back at Melissa. Something shifted in her expression. Not fear, but recognition. Understanding of something she couldn't quite name. I concede. Her voice was quiet. Your bond is beyond anything I've ever seen. Beyond anything I imagined possible. The crowd didn't know how to react. Some cheered, others sat in confused silence. This wasn't the violence they'd expected, the blood they'd been promised. "Final match!" The herald's voice boomed across the arena. "Melissa Bryan versus Lady Seraphina Cross." And there it was, the bloodlust returning to the crowd's roar. Finally, the noble against the peasant, the established order against the upstart. This is what they really wanted to see. Lady Seraphina entered the combat circle, and even from across the sand, Melissa could see the desperation in her eyes. Not just to win, but to destroy. To prove that the natural order still held, that nobles were superior, that this peasant girl's success had been nothing but luck and tricks. "I'll show everyone what happens to pretenders," Seraphina said, loud enough for the first rows to hear. "What happens to those who forget their place?" Azura, her enchanted panther, prowled forward. Blue flames flickered across her fur, hot enough that the air above her shimmered with heat. The starting horn sounded. Azura attacked immediately, blue flames intensifying to white-hot fury. The sand where she'd been standing turned to glass. She lunged at Ember with claws wreathed in fire that could melt stone. Ember sat calmly and let the flames wash over him. They passed through him like water through mist, touching nothing, harming nothing. Ember sat unchanged, unbothered, as if the supernatural fire was nothing more than a gentle breeze. "Stronger!" Seraphina's voice cracked with something like panic. "Use everything!" Azura's flames burned hotter, brighter, until people in the front rows had to shield their faces from the heat. But still they couldn't touch the small fox who sat calmly in the center of an inferno. "Use soul fire!" Seraphina screamed. Azura hesitated. Even through her bond to her tamer, even through years of obedience, the panther hesitated. Because soul fire didn't burn flesh. It burned spirit, agonizing, devastating, forbidden in tournaments for good reason. It was a weapon of war, not sport. "I said use it!" The blue flames shifted to purple, then to black edged with purple, the color of bruises, of poison, of death itself. And instead of aiming at Ember, the flames lanced toward Melissa herself. Seraphina's rage had overcome her reason. She wasn't trying to win anymore. She was trying to kill. "That's illegal!" someone in the crowd shouted. "Guards!" Alpha King Davian was on his feet, but he was too far away, the guards too slow. Ember moved faster than possible. One moment he was sitting calmly in the sand. The next he was between Melissa and the soul fire, his small body intercepting flames meant to burn away a person's very essence. The purple-black fire struck him directly, and Ember's body began to glow. First amber, like his usual eyes, spreading from his center outward. Then gold, pure and bright like sunlight captured in physical form. Then white, so brilliant it hurt to look at directly, as if a star had fallen to earth. "Ember, no!" Melissa's voice was raw. "You don't have to—" But it was too late. The transformation had begun, and there was no stopping it now. A voice resonated in every mind present. Not sound, but thought, pure and undeniable. Enough. The single word carried weight that pressed down on 10,000 souls. Every wolf in the arena whimpered and flattened to the ground. Every person felt their breath catch, their hearts stutter. "You sought to harm my chosen one. You have forced my hand." The light around Ember intensified, becoming almost painful to witness. I wanted to remain hidden, to teach through example, through gentle guidance, to see if humanity could remember the old ways without being forced. His small form began to expand, growing upward and outward, bones cracking and reshaping, not with pain but with terrible purpose. But you value only power, only dominance, only force. The light became blinding and people had to cover their eyes or look away. Very well, let me show you what true power looks like. The light exploded outward in a shockwave that knocked people in the first 10 rows backward, that shattered viewing spheres, that sent sand swirling in a miniature storm. When it faded enough to see again, something stood in the center of the arena that made the breath leave every lung. Ember was gone. In his place stood a legend, made flesh. 12 feet tall at the shoulder, the creature stood on 4 powerful legs that ended in paws the size of shield bosses. His body was that of a massive wolf, but his face held the delicate features of a fox. Elongated muzzle, pointed ears now large enough to catch every whisper in the stunned arena. His fur was pure white, each strand seeming to generate its own light, creating an aura that made him appear as if he was made of captured starlight rather than flesh and bone. But it was his tails that drew the eye and held it captive. 6 of them, each as long as his body, fanned out behind him like magnificent banners. They moved independently, flowing through the air as if underwater, trailing light that left afterimages burned into the vision of everyone watching. And on his forehead, blazing with golden radiance that rivaled the sun, was a mark, a crescent moon surrounded by 7 stars, the ancient, symbol of the guardian spirits, unseen in this kingdom for 3 centuries. The mark pulsed with each beat of his heart, and with each pulse, every wolf-blooded creature in the arena felt an answering throb in their own chests. This wasn't just size. This wasn't just physical presence. This was power that existed on a level most people couldn't comprehend. Spiritual, primal, absolute. The air itself seemed denser around him, as if reality bent slightly in his presence. Looking at him was like staring into the heart of a lightning storm, beautiful and terrifying and so far beyond human scale that the mind struggled to process it. I am Embrys the Eternal. His voice resonated in every mind simultaneously, bypassing ears entirely. 4th of the 7 original guardians. I who taught your ancestors the sacred bond between human and spirit. I who watched kingdoms rise and fall like seasons changing. I who remained hidden for 3 centuries, waiting. His glowing eyes swept across the arena, and people flinched away from that gaze even from hundreds of feet away, waiting for one worthy to remember the old ways, waiting to see if humanity could learn without being forced, waiting and watching you forget everything that made you great. The arena had descended into chaos. Royal guards raised weapons with trembling hands, knowing even as they did that their spears and swords would be as useful as throwing pebbles at a mountain. Nobles screamed, their voices shrill with terror. "Demon! Monster! Kill it before it destroys us all!" Some tried to flee, climbing over seats, trampling each other in their panic. Others simply froze, minds unable to process what stood before them. The common folk responded differently. Many dropped to their knees, whether from fear or something like reverence was impossible to tell. Children cried in their parents' arms. Old women made warding signs, or perhaps signs of blessing. The gestures were the same, only the intent differed. But it was the beasts who responded most dramatically. Azura, Lady Seraphina's enchanted panther who moments ago had been radiating deadly power, rolled onto her back in complete submission. She made soft mewing sounds like a kitten before its mother, all her supernatural flames extinguished. Every line of her body screamed recognition and surrender to something infinitely greater than herself. In the holding areas beneath the arena, Ragnar the dire wolf threw back his head and howled, not in challenge, but in something that sounded almost like grief or longing, a cry of recognition for something his species had lost and forgotten. Goliath the war-bear, who'd shaken the ground with his roar just hours ago, dropped to all fours and pressed his massive head against the stone floor, making himself as small as possible before the presence of the guardian. Every beast in the Colosseum, every dire wolf, war-bear, griffin, panther, shadow wolf, responded the same way. Instinctive, submission to something ancient and sacred, Not because they were forced, but because every fiber of their being recognized what stood before them. This was what they'd come from, what their distant ancestors had known, what had been lost when the covenant broke. And Tempest, Alpha King Davian's legendary shadow wolf, who'd never shown fear or submission to anything, trembled so violently his legs nearly buckled. He tried to hide behind the obsidian throne, whimpering like a frightened pup, his silver-veined fur standing on end. High on his throne, Alpha King Davian sat frozen, his knuckles white where he gripped the armrests. His mind was racing, connecting pieces he'd never wanted to connect, understanding truths he'd spent his life avoiding, his grandmother's stories, the betrayal that cursed the kingdom, the first king who earned his crown through friendship, not conquest, the gradual decline over 3 centuries that no one could explain, failing crops, dying wells, children born, weaker than their parents. It had all been real, not metaphor, not moral tales, real. And the bill for 300 years of lies was standing in the center of his arena, radiating power that made his legendary shadow wolf cower in terror. Against all advice, against every instinct of self-preservation, Alpha King Davian stood. "Sire, no!" Chancellor Petra grabbed his arm, her composure cracking completely. "It's too dangerous. That thing could kill you with a thought." Royal guards moved to block his path. "Your Majesty, please, let us handle this. You can't—" "Stand aside." Davian's voice carried the absolute authority of an alpha, but there was something else in it too. Something that might have been fear, or might have been determination, or might have been both. "This is my duty. Mine alone." He descended the steps from his throne, each footfall echoing in the arena that had fallen eerily quiet. 10,000 people watched him walk toward the massive guardian spirit, a mortal, man approaching something that looked carved from starlight and divine wrath. Tempest wouldn't follow, still cowering behind the throne. Davian walked alone. When he reached the sand of the arena floor, he stopped 3 paces from Empress. From this distance, the Guardian's power was almost overwhelming. A pressure against his chest, a ringing in his ears, a weight on his soul that wanted him to kneel, to prostrate himself, to acknowledge his insignificance. But Davian had not become king by giving in to fear. He met those ancient glowing eyes and forced his voice to remain steady. "You're the one, aren't you?" His words carried across the silent arena. "The one my ancestor betrayed, the guardian spirit who bonded with the first Alpha King Davian." Empress lowered his massive head, bringing those glowing eyes level with Davian's. When he spoke, his voice was gentle, almost sad. "Davian the First was my dearest friend. We built this kingdom together, stone by stone, law by law. He valued wisdom over strength, partnership over domination. We dreamed of a realm where humans and spirits worked as equals, where power came from harmony rather than conquest." The Guardian's 6 tails swayed slowly, their light casting dancing shadows across the sand. "His grandson, Davian II, murdered me as I slept. He believed my power could be stolen, that by killing me, he could claim the strength I represented. He was wrong. Power that comes from trust cannot be taken by force. I merely withdrew, along with my brothers and sisters, waiting to see if your line would produce another soul worthy of the bond we once shared." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Around the arena, nobles who'd always been told their power was earned, righteous, and justified felt that foundation crumble beneath them. Empress's gaze intensified, pinning Davian in place. "But you are not that descendant, are you, young king? You sit on a throne built from genocide and call it justice. You take beasts from their families and call it taming. You force bonds through magical chains and call it partnership. You value spectacle over substance, strength over wisdom, control over trust." Each accusation landed like a physical blow. Davian wanted to argue, to defend himself, to list the good things he'd done as king. But he looked at Tempest, still cowering in terror behind the throne, and couldn't find the words. Because Empress was right. He'd taken Tempest from his pack as a frightened pup. He'd trained him through harsh discipline, using the alpha bond to force obedience. He'd never once asked what Tempest wanted, only commanded what he needed. Their bond was built on domination dressed up as partnership, control masked as loyalty. "You've forgotten everything your ancestor learned," Empress continued, his voice carrying a weight of centuries of disappointment. "And in forgetting, you've doomed your kingdom to slow death. The land itself remembers the betrayal, the earth grieves the broken covenant, and until it is restored, your people will continue to sicken and fade, generation by generation, until nothing remains but dust and the memory of what you once could have been." Davian felt shame burn through him, hotter than any fire. "What do you want from me?" His voice cracked. "Vengeance? Punishment? My life?" "I want nothing from you," Empress said simply. "I am not here to take. I am here to teach, to offer one final chance for your kingdom to remember what it lost." The Guardian straightened to his full height, and the gesture made Davian acutely aware of how small he was, how fragile, how utterly powerless before this ancient being. "I could destroy this kingdom," Empress said matter-of-factly. "Level these walls stone by stone. Scatter your armies like leaves before wind. The power to do so rests in this form, earned through millennia of existence and partnership with creation itself." Around the arena, people whimpered. Some prayed. Many wept. But destruction teaches nothing. Vengeance is empty, and I am first and always a teacher. His glowing eyes softened slightly. "So I offer you a test, young king, the same test your ancestor faced and failed. Release your Tempest from the alpha bond. Let him choose freely whether to stand with you or leave you. If he chooses to defend you out of love rather than obligation, out of trust rather than force, then perhaps there is hope for this kingdom after all." The challenge hung in the air, simple, terrible, impossible to refuse. Davian looked at Tempest, still cowering behind the throne. The shadow wolf who'd been his companion for 7 years, who'd fought beside him in battles, who'd slept at the foot of his bed and been the closest thing to a friend a lonely king could have. But had Tempest chosen any of it? Or had he been forced, bound by magical chains that prevented him from saying no? Chancellor Petra's voice came from somewhere behind him, urgent and desperate. "Sire, you can't. If you release the bond, he could turn on you. That wolf has every reason to hate you. This is suicide." She was right. Tempest had been taken from his pack, his family. He'd been trained through methods that would be called cruel if applied to humans, beaten when he disobeyed, starved when he resisted, forced to submit through overwhelming magical compulsion. The alpha bond was comfortable because Tempest couldn't refuse it. Remove that bond and what would Tempest choose? Davian looked into Empress's ancient eyes and saw the truth. This was the test his ancestor had failed. Davian II had tried to take power by force, to steal what should have been given freely. He'd murdered his guardian spirit in sleep, believing power could be claimed through violence. Davian had to do the opposite. He had to give freely what had always been taken. He had to trust where his ancestor had tried to control. And if Tempest abandoned him, if the wolf chose freedom over loyalty, perhaps that was no less than he deserved. Davian took a breath that felt like it might be his last. Then he turned toward his throne, toward the shadow wolf cowering behind it, and spoke words that no king had spoken in 300 years. "Tempest, I release you from the alpha bond." The magical binding that had existed between them for 7 years, invisible chains that forced obedience, compelled loyalty, made refusal impossible, shattered. Davian felt it break like physical pain, a tearing sensation in his chest. Around the arena, every tamer who'd ever used an alpha bond gasped in sympathetic shock, feeling an echo of that severing. Tempest staggered, suddenly free for the first time in his life. His legs trembled. His eyes went wide with shock and something that might have been fear or might have been hope. He was free, truly free. He could attack the king who'd enslaved him, could run to join wild wolf packs, could simply walk away and never look back. 10,000 people held their breath. Davian closed his eyes and waited for judgment. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then came the sound of paws on stone, heavy, deliberate, approaching. Davian forced his eyes open. Tempest walked toward him slowly, no longer cowering, his massive form moving with natural grace now that fear had released its grip. He reached Davian and stopped, not behind him as a dominated pet would, not ahead of him as a forced guardian would, beside him as an equal. The shadow wolf pressed his massive head against Davian's hand, not in submission but in choice, free choice, the choice to stay. To stand with this flawed king who'd finally done one thing right. Davian's hand trembled as it touched Tempest's fur. 7 years of companionship, and this was the first time it had been freely offered. In the moment you offered freedom, you proved trust. Embers's voice was gentle now, approving. And trust, true trust, freely given and freely received, is the foundation of all sacred bonds. Your ancestor learned this lesson once, in his youth. You've just relearned it in yours. Perhaps there is hope for this kingdom after all. But the guardian's expression grew serious again. However, one reformed king is not enough. The entire kingdom must face its sins. The truth that has been hidden for 3 centuries must finally be spoken aloud. He turned his glowing gaze toward Melissa, still standing where she'd been when the transformation began, tears streaming down her face. Melissa Bryan, descendant of the beast speakers who were slaughtered for discovering corruption. I grant you the title of Royal Beast Master. I grant you access to the Moonveil Library. But first, his voice rose, resonating not just in minds, but in the very stones of the arena, in the earth beneath their feet, in the air itself. Let all present learn the truth. He raised one massive paw and power exploded outward. The doors of the Moonveil Library, sealed for 300 years with magic that no human could break, burst open with a sound like thunder. Ancient scrolls flew through the air as if carried by invisible hands, unrolling before the crowd. But more than that, images began to appear in the sky above the arena, projected through magic older than the kingdom itself. Murals, memories, the truth that had been locked away. The first images showed humans and guardian spirits working together, building magnificent structures, creating wonders, sharing knowledge, living in harmony that made the kingdom prosper beyond imagination. Davian I standing beside a smaller form of Embers, both laughing, both young, both filled with hope for what they were building. Then the images darkened, guardians murdered in their sleep by the very humans they'd trusted, beast speakers hunted through forests, their families slaughtered, their children killed to prevent the bloodline from continuing. Secret meetings of nobles planning genocide to hide their corruption. The rewriting of history, truth replaced with lies, partnership erased and replaced with conquest. The crowd watched in horror as their ancestors, nobles whose descendants still held power, committed genocide dressed up as heroic war. "This can't be real," someone whispered. "Our ancestors did this," a noble cried out, his voice breaking. "We built everything on lies," another voice said, and this one held not disbelief, but terrible understanding. Everything, all of it. 300 years of prosperity bought with innocent blood. Embers's voice carried across the chaos. This is what was hidden. This is what your kingdom was founded upon: genocide, betrayal, the murder of those who trusted you most. And the land itself remembers. The earth knows. And until you make amends, until you restore what was broken, your kingdom will continue its slow death unto the final generation. The truth hung in the air, undeniable and devastating. And in the shocked silence that followed, everyone understood that nothing would ever be the same again. The magical projections faded, but their impact lingered like smoke after a fire. 10,000 people sat in stunned silence, minds struggling to reconcile 3 centuries of comfortable lies with the brutal truth they'd just witnessed. Nobles whose ancestors had participated in the genocide looked pale and sick. Common folk stared at the arena floor, at the king's platform, at the massive guardian spirit still radiating ancient power, trying to understand what this meant for everything they'd believed. Alpha King Davian stood in the center of the arena, no longer on his throne high above, symbolically equal now, standing on the same blood-stained sand as the commoner girl who'd exposed everything. When he spoke, his voice carried across the arena with the weight of absolute authority, but also with something new: humility, shame, the terrible burden of inherited sin. The images you have seen are truth. Each word fell like a stone into still water. 3 centuries ago, my ancestor Davian II betrayed the guardian spirits who had built this kingdom alongside humanity. He murdered them in their sleep, beings who trusted him, who called his grandfather friend. He murdered the beast speakers, their human partners, hunting them through forests, killing their families, their children, to prevent the bloodline from surviving. His voice grew stronger, fueled by determination to finish what he'd started. He took power through genocide and rewrote history to hide his crime. Every king since has maintained that lie, building prosperity on graves, calling theft conquest and murder justice. My father maintained it. I maintained it. Until today. The crowd's murmuring grew louder. Some nobles stood, their faces red with outrage. "You're condemning your own bloodline." Lady Seraphina's voice cracked with disbelief. "Your father, your grandfather, you're saying they were complicit in maintaining a lie that has been killing this kingdom for 300 years. Davian finished. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying." Baron Thaddeus slammed his fist against his seat. "This is weakness. Kings don't apologize. Kings don't admit fault. You're destroying everything we've built." "Everything we've built on stolen ground," Davian countered. "Everything we've sustained through broken promises. Look around you, Baron. Really look. When was the last time your lands produced the yields your grandfather's records show? When was the last time your children were born as strong as you were? When did you last drink from a well that ran truly clear?" The Baron opened his mouth, then closed it, having no answer. From the common sections, different voices rose. That's why the crops fail. Why the monsters multiply in the forests. Why nothing grows like it used to, no matter what we do. "The land remembers," an old woman's voice called out, and others took up the phrase. "The land remembers the betrayal." Embers's voice resonated across the arena, gentler now but no less powerful. "When the guardians withdrew, the ancient covenant broke. We spirits are tied to this land. Our presence sustains it, nurtures it, keeps it healthy and abundant. Without us, the earth itself grows sick. Your declining harvests, your harsh winters, the increasing beast attacks, the children born weaker with each generation, all of it stems from breaking sacred partnership 3 centuries ago." New projections appeared in the sky, not historical images but ancient text written in a language that somehow everyone could read. "When greed murders wisdom, the land remembers. When power corrupts partnership, the earth grows cold. Only when true bond returns, freely given, freely received, can the kingdom heal from wounds dealt by its own hand. Davian took a breath that seemed to draw strength from somewhere deep within. I proclaim new laws effective immediately throughout all territories under my rule. Chancellor Petra stepped forward, scrolls ready to record, though her hands shook slightly. First, Alpha commands are hereby abolished. No more magical binding that forces beasts to obey. No more chains that prevent them from refusing. Gasps echoed through the noble section. But that's how we... Someone started. Second, Davian continued over the protests, all captive beasts may choose to stay with their current partners or leave freely. We will not hunt them. We will not reclaim them. Their choice will be honored. More protests, louder now, but Davian's voice rose above them. Third, partnership replaces domination in all taming laws. Mutual respect, not force. Consent, not compulsion. Fourth, beast speaker bloodlines are hereby restored to positions of honor. Their descendants, who have hidden in fear for 3 centuries, are welcomed back and granted rights to reclaim ancestral lands. Fifth, the Moonveil Library is open to all. No more forbidden knowledge. No more hidden truths. The past must be known if we are to build a better future. Sire! Chancellor Petra's composure cracked completely. If you free every bonded beast in the kingdom, chaos will follow. Violence, attacks. You'll tear apart the very fabric of... Perhaps, Davian interrupted quietly, or perhaps they'll choose to stay with partners who finally show them respect. Perhaps trust will prove stronger than chains ever were. We'll find out. He turned to face the crowd, his storm-gray eyes meeting the gaze of commoner and noble alike. This changes everything. I know that. Many of you will resist. Some of you will call me weak, call this madness. But I would rather rule a kingdom that faces its sins honestly than maintain prosperity built on lies and graves. The choice is made. Throughout the arena, tamers looked at their beasts with new uncertainty. For the first time in 300 years, they would have to ask rather than command, trust rather than control. And they were terrified. The change began immediately. In the arena, tamers nervously approached their beasts. Some spoke words they'd never thought to say. I release you. You're free. Others simply broke the alpha bond through magic, severing the invisible chains that had bound their companions. For a moment, nothing happened. Beasts stood frozen, unable to process sudden freedom after lifetimes of compulsion. The crowd held its breath, waiting for violence, for revenge, for the chaos Chancellor Petra had predicted. But most of the beasts stayed, not all of them. Ragnar, Lord Cassian's dire wolf, took one look at the empty space where his former master had stood and bolted for the exit, running toward the forests beyond the city. A few others followed, creatures who'd been beaten, starved, broken beyond the ability to trust again. They ran for the wild, for freedom, and no one tried to stop them. But most stayed, and in staying they transformed. Duchess Vivienne removed the alpha bond from Silverclaw with trembling hands. You can go if you want, she whispered. I won't blame you. I won't. The griffin interrupted her by gently nuzzling her shoulder, a gesture of affection that had never been commanded, never been forced. Silverclaw chose to stay, and in that choice their partnership became real for the first time. A common soldier in the stands released his old hunting hound, a scarred, graying dog who'd been with him for 12 years. The dog immediately jumped up, licking his face, tail wagging furiously. The soldier started crying. You always chose me, didn't you? All those years you would have stayed anyway. The attacks they'd feared didn't materialize. A few beasts snapped at former masters who'd been particularly cruel before running away. But the expected bloodbath, the predicted chaos, never came. Most beasts, given freedom, chose to remain with partners they'd grown to care for despite the chains, or they simply left, peacefully, seeking the wild they'd lost. But not all stayed. Lady Seraphina released Azura with confidence bordering on arrogance. "There," she said, her voice carrying a hint of smugness. "You're free. Now you can choose to remain with me properly." Azura looked at her with eyes that held no warmth, no affection, no gratitude. The enchanted panther, who'd been forced to burn and fight and hurt on command for 7 years, turned away without a sound. "Azura!" Seraphina's voice cracked. "Where are you? Wait! I gave you everything. The finest food, the best training, a place in noble halls. How can you—" But Azura just kept walking, blue flames flickering once more across her fur, not in aggression, but in something like relief. She walked out of the arena and disappeared into the city streets, leaving her former master calling after her in vain. Empress's voice was gentle but firm. "You gave her commands and cruelty disguised as care. You gave her a cage dressed up as privilege. She owed you nothing, and now she's free to find what she truly needs." Lady Seraphina collapsed to her knees in the sand, understanding at last what she'd lost, what she'd never really had. Melissa approached Empress, who'd returned to his magnificent guardian form. Even after everything, she had to tilt her head back to meet those glowing eyes. Tears streamed down her face, not from sadness, but from overwhelming emotion she couldn't quite name. "You freed me from a trap 5 years ago," Empress said softly, "though it cost you dearly. You used your only healing poultice on a dying fox instead of rushing back to save your village from plague. You treated me as equal when everyone else saw only a pet or a tool. You never commanded. You only asked. That is why I chose you. That is the old way, the way of sacred partnership." "I didn't free you expecting anything in return," Melissa said, her voice thick with tears. "You were suffering. That was enough reason. And that, little one, is exactly why you were worthy." 1 month passed. The first week brought chaos, as Chancellor Petra had predicted. Some nobles tried to reinstate alpha bonds by force, attempting to reclaim beasts that had left them. Alpha King Davian stripped titles from those who resisted, exiling them to the borderlands. Other nobles fled on their own, unwilling to live in a kingdom that had rejected everything they'd built their power upon. Violence erupted in scattered pockets, angry tamers attacking beasts, frightened villagers defending themselves against creatures they no longer trusted. But these incidents were fewer and less severe than anyone had feared. The second week brought adjustment. Tamers learned to ask instead of command, to offer instead of demand. It was clumsy at first, awkward like learning to walk after spending a lifetime crawling. But slowly, tentatively, new partnerships began to form. Genuine ones, built on mutual respect and freely given trust. Beast speakers emerged from hiding, descendants of those who'd fled the genocide 3 centuries ago. They'd lived in obscurity, passing down their knowledge, mother to daughter, father to son, waiting for a time when it would be safe to remember. Now they came to the capital, teaching the old ways, showing people what partnership truly looked like. The third week brought signs that the land itself was responding. Crops in a village that Empress had visited sprouted overnight, green shoots pushing through soil that had been barren for years. The healing gardens, legendary structures that had stood dormant for 2 centuries, suddenly burst into bloom, flowers of species thought extinct covering every surface. Weather patterns shifted. A harsh drought that had gripped the eastern territories broke with gentle rain that fell for 3 days straight. Minor spirits, tiny things like wisps and forest sprites that had been thought extinct, began appearing near the capital, drawn by the change they could sense. And in the 4th week, a second guardian awakened. Terramain the Earth Singer, a massive bear with fur that looked like living stone, appeared before a humble farmer named Willem in the southern territories. Willem was 73 years old and had treated his plow ox as a partner for 40 years. Talking to him, asking his opinion, resting when the ox was tired even if work remained. It had made him strange in his village, a figure of gentle mockery. But when Terramain appeared in his field, ancient and powerful, she spoke a single sentence that made him weep. You remembered. Even when everyone forgot, you remembered the old ways. News of the second guardian spread across the kingdom faster than wildfire. 2 of the 7 had returned. 5 remained sleeping, watching, waiting to see if the change would hold. The tournament grounds were rebuilt as the Garden of Remembrance. No more blood-stained sand, no more wooden barriers marked with claw gouges. Instead, carefully tended, gardens surrounded a central memorial, a stone wall carved with the names of every beast speaker, murdered 3 centuries ago. Images of all 7 original guardians were rendered in mosaic, above the names, beautiful and eternal. An eternal flame burned at the center, maintained by Melissa and Empress, a promise that the dead would be remembered and the living would do better. The inscription read simply, "Here we remember what was lost. Here we promise to do better." Dawn broke over the Garden of Remembrance, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Melissa stood before the memorial, Ember in his small fox form beside her. She'd grown accustomed to both forms now, the magnificent guardian and the comfortable companion. Both were real. Both were him. Footsteps approached. Alpha King Davian with Tempest walking freely beside him, not behind, not ahead, but beside. The Shadow Wolf's posture had changed over the past month. He still moved with power and grace, but the fear was gone from his eyes, replaced by something like contentment. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun rise. "The nobles are still resisting," Davian said finally. "Lord Harwick tried to reinstate alpha bonds in his province last week. I had to strip his title and exile him. Others are plotting in secret, trying to undermine the new laws without openly defying them." He sighed, and for a moment looked less like a king and more like a young man carrying a burden too heavy for his shoulders. "This change, it's harder than I expected, harder than I hoped." "Nothing worth doing is easy," Melissa replied. She gestured to the blooming gardens around them, to the healthy trees, to the small birds that had returned to the capital for the first time in years. "You're asking people to give up power. That always meets resistance. But look at what's already growing." Empress shifted to his guardian form, 6 tails swaying gently in the morning breeze. His voice was contemplative. 2 guardians have awakened. 5 remain sleeping, watching from their hidden places. They will return when the change proves genuine, not just words spoken in crisis, but actions sustained over time. Not just one moment of courage, but daily choices to do what's right instead of what's easy. The sound of voices drew their attention. A young girl, perhaps 8 years old, entered the garden with her mother. The girl stopped suddenly, pointing at a small wild fox sitting near the memorial. Not Ember, just an ordinary fox drawn by the peace of the place. "Mama, can I pet it?" the girl asked, her voice bright with innocent wonder. The mother tensed immediately, old fears rising. Beasts were dangerous. They attacked. They couldn't be trusted. 3 centuries of teaching screamed at her to pull her daughter away, to protect her from the threat. But she'd seen the projections in the arena. She'd heard the guardian's words. She'd watched beasts choose freely and most choose gentleness. "Be careful," she said instead, "and gentle." The girl approached slowly, her hand extended. "Hello, little friend," she whispered, patient and kind. The fox sniffed her hand, considered for a moment, then allowed her to touch its soft fur. The girl's delighted laugh rang through the garden like bells. The mother watched, and something shifted in her expression. Understanding, recognition. This was how it should be. This was what had been lost and was now being found again. Melissa smiled, feeling something tight in her chest finally loosen. That's how it starts. One person at a time, one choice at a time, one bond at a time. Embers's voice was warm with approval. You freed me from a trap at great cost to yourself, little one. The kingdom must make that same choice, not once but every day. Choose partnership over domination. Choose respect over control. Choose what's right over what's easy, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. His glowing eyes swept. Across the garden, the city beyond, the kingdom that was slowly, painfully learning to heal. Do that, and the guardians will return. Do that, and the land will heal completely. Do that, and humanity will rediscover the greatest magic of all, the magic that doesn't come from power or force, but from trust between equals. The young girl's laughter continued, pure and joyful, as she gently stroked the fox's fur. Then came different footsteps, slower, more labored. An old woman entered the garden, hunched with age and poverty, her clothes patched and worn. In her arms she carried a small rabbit wrapped in cloth. The creature's breathing was shallow, one of its legs bent at a wrong angle. "Please," the old woman said, her voice breaking. They say the beast speaker could help. My granddaughter found him in the road. A cart ran over his leg. I know I shouldn't ask. I know I'm no one, but please." Melissa approached and gently took the rabbit. Its tiny heart raced with fear and pain. For a moment, she felt the old familiar pull to fix it herself, to show her power, to be the savior. But that wasn't the lesson. That wasn't the point. She placed the rabbit back in the old woman's arms and guided her hands to the proper position. Place your hand here, over his heart. Close your eyes. Think of warmth, of comfort, of healing. Pour your care into him through your touch. "But I'm not special," the woman protested. "I don't have power, You brought an injured creature to safety instead of leaving it to die," Melissa interrupted gently. "You used resources you could barely afford to help something small and helpless. That makes you exactly what the world needs. Now try, feel your care, let it flow through your hands." The old woman closed her eyes, trembling. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a faint glow appeared beneath her weathered hands, soft, gentle, nothing like the brilliant light of a guardian, but real nonetheless. The rabbit's breathing steadied. Its leg began to straighten, not completely healed, but better. Healing. The old woman gasped, staring at her hands in wonder. "How did I—" "Because you cared," Melissa said simply. "That's where all true power begins." Embers threw back his massive head and howled, not in threat or warning, but in pure, joyful celebration. The sound echoed across the garden, across the city, across the kingdom, and somewhere far away in hidden places where ancient spirits slept, a third guardian stirred, not fully awake yet, but beginning, sensing change, sensing hope. Melissa watched the old woman leave, cradling the healing rabbit, tears of joy streaming down her weathered face. She turned to Davian, who stood watching with an expression of wonder mixed with understanding. "That's the answer," Melissa said quietly. "Not grand gestures or royal decrees, though those matter too, but small kindnesses, individual choices, one person caring for one small creature. That's what changes the world." Davian nodded slowly, and for the first time since his coronation, he smiled with something like peace. One bond at a time. Tempest pressed against his side, freely given affection, freely received. Embers's tail swayed gently in the morning light. The young girl's laughter mixed with birdsong as the fox allowed her to continue petting its soft fur. And in the garden of remembrance, beneath the names of those who'd been lost and the promise to do better, a kingdom began, slowly, painfully, hopefully, to heal.
So there you have it, a story about a girl, a fox, and a kingdom that forgot what mattered most. You know, I'm curious about something. Whether you're watching this from a bustling city, or a quiet village somewhere, from a place where trust is easy or where it's hard to come by, I'd love to hear where this story found you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Sometimes it's wild to see how far these tales travel. And hey, if this one made you think, made you feel something, or taught you something worth keeping, maybe hit that like button, pass it along to someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so you catch the next one. Because stories like these, they only matter if they're shared. Thanks for being here. Until next time.